God, thank you for this day, this podcast. Thank you for the new season of this podcast. Help it to glorify you. Help us to remember that it's not about us, and help us to just have a good conversation that is edifying to those who listen. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Pride is the topic for today's podcast, as you know. So, let's talk about one of the main areas that I see pride for myself in my life, which is dealing with parents, hanging out with parents, getting reprimanding, disciplining from parents, and all of the above.
Okay.
How would you like to speak on that?
You go ahead. You start. You were already. It just seemed like you were already.
Okay,
going.
I'll speak on it.
Yeah.
Shoot, I think one of the most humbling things that happens to me all the time is just like my dad telling me to do something while I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like I'm doing schoolwork and he's like, go to the recycling. And that's what I have to do. That's my responsibility in the house or one of my responsibilities. And I'm just like, so I used to just be like, no, I'm doing stuff. No, I can't. No, I have work to do, blah, 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 blah. But I think once I started walking with the Lord more, and now I see more and more very concrete evidence that you're supposed to obey your parents and do it with a good attitude, which is honoring them.
It's biblical, yeah.
And so you just go, he says, go do the recycling, and I'm doing something, and I just go, just bear and grin it, and go get the recycling and put it in and go back. And
yeah, because it's most of the time when at least for me, when my parents tell me to do something while I'm in the middle of doing something else, it's like most of the issue is just getting started on it. Like if you wanted like the dishes, let's say, like if my parents tell me to do the dishes, the hardest part is just getting to the kitchen and starting it because it's like I don't want to do this.
which sounds so petty.
I know, but once you're there doing it, it's like, oh, that took like 2 minutes, like not 2 minutes, that's impossible. That's it, like 10 minutes,
15
that
minutes.
was nothing. And you're like, why did I complain? Why did I like kind of act like a brat for that? There was no reason for it.
And I don't know if you can relate to this, but what tends to happen is God provides enough time for you, and you end up having enough time to do that thing that you thought you wouldn't have enough time to do if you helped them out. Which is really, really cool, because God provides what we need to follow his commandments, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, sometimes I just, like, don't want to talk to my dad or... Oh, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. There are stages, at least for me for sure, where I would want to go the whole day just not saying a word to any of my parents based on something I did from like the day before or like an hour before. And obviously, I mean, I end up forgiving them and stuff. But yeah, I totally agree with you. There are just those moments where it's like you want nothing to do with them at a time.
But I also think like sometimes I'm really in the mood to talk and have a good time. But some days it's just randomly like, oh, dang it.
For me,
I don't want to.
For me, it's never like that where sometimes I'll wake up and I'll just be like, I don't want to talk to them. There's always a reason for me.
Really?
Yeah, there's always a reason for me.
Because
I know I could wake up one day and be sort of like bummed, like I don't want to do anything, don't want to talk to anyone, but I still will. But in terms of like talking to parents, it's like they have to actively have done something that I disagree with for me to actually just not want to even be near them. Not a single word spoken. At least that's what it is for me. I'm sure other people are sort of like you, where like they'll just the parents could have done nothing.
Yeah, it's literally no reason.
It's just like a mood swing. Yeah.
And it's not even sometimes that I'm happy. I mean, not happy. Like sometimes I'm really happy.
Yeah.
And then I'll just be angry once they walk into the room.
Do you have, for the anger part, is it sort of like a switch for you where not like you're bipolar, but like you could just be happy 1 minute and then literally nothing could happen and just the next minute you're angry? Or is it like you think of something and then you get angry?
I think it's just some days, as soon as my dad comes home, I'm just like, nope.
Yeah. Is it because like you think he's gonna ask you to do something, or is it
Yeah.
Just,
yeah.
Okay.
And then I just don't want to be bothered if I'm working on something. I want to be able to stay focused, and I focus the best alone. And if there's any added variable of somebody else in there, then I'm just like, no. Because my mom will usually like just be working on something else. But if I'm working on something, my dad will be like, oh, what are you working on? Blah, 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 blah. And you just don't want to answer those questions, which is really, really petty.
I feel you for that because my mom's like a stay-at-home mom, so she's at home most of the time.
So you're used to your mom being there.
So I'm used to her there, but when my dad comes, like he could very well ask me to, like, empty the car, which he tends to do sometimes. Like he'll need some stuff to empty, and like you were saying, like I'm petty of it. Like I don't want to do that, and the hardest part is just getting in the car and starting to load. But once you're done, you're done.
Which I think it makes sense also because your dad is at work a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Right? So whenever you're going to be a dad, assuming you'll be a dad, God willing, you won't be with your kids as much as your wife is, presumably. Yeah. At least if you have a similar family structure as you have now. So you're gonna have to bank on those like 3 hours every day from dinner to going to bed rather than your mom the whole entire day.
Yeah.
At least specifically because we're homeschooled most of the time. So your dad has to kind of make those hours more saturated and talk to you and kind of get to know where you're at the moment, which totally makes sense, right? It's just I'm not always in the mood for it.
I mean, for me, like, even sometimes when he'd come to me and be like, you know, you want to go hang out, you want to go to dinner, sometimes I don't feel like it. But I'll always say yes because it's like that's effort being put in, and I don't want to put that effort away.
Because you know it'll be worth it later.
Yeah, and like once you get there, once you start the conversation, because there's always something we talk about, whether or not it's just how I'm doing or it's like a personal topic or it's a teaching he wants to, you know, let me know about. Once you're in it, once you get going, and once you get wisdom out of it, it's worth it. And that's kind of what Proverbs says about it too, is how like listening to I think it's Proverbs 13. Which is like listening to your parents and understanding your parents. You get wisdom out of that. They're wise. They'll spread their wisdom to you, and that's totally true. Like I said, like I'll have dinner with him and I'll learn something out of it. I'll gain information out of it.
Yeah, Proverbs 13:1. A wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. I really like that because it's kind of saying. And then Proverbs also goes on to talk about how people who love rebuke and love instruction are wise and they'll live long in the land. Yeah. And so it's not, I think people love instruction, but like love is also like a choice. A lot of the time. Love is a choice and a feeling that's kind of, but I think an aspect of love for sure is a choice. So you can choose to love the instruction. You can choose to like the good parts rather than just the humbling parts.
Yeah.
Because one of the big things about instruction that tends to get me is like, you think you know better than them. Or, oh, why are you telling me things to do? Or it's just humbling. You get low and then you realize, oh man, they've lived a lot longer than I have.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's in the same way, well, not in the same way, but at a much more micro level and how whenever God tells us things to do in his word, we've only lived for such a short time, but God has infinite wisdom and insight and is outside of time.
Yeah.
So it would be really stupid of us not to listen to what God says. So in a smaller level, our parents have lived longer and walked with God longer.
Yeah. You want to know what else is humbling is when your parents notice like a pattern in your behavior and they're like, you got to change that. This could lead to A. Let's say A could
and
lead
they've
to
seen
B,
it before,
and they've experienced it before. And at the time, at least for me, I sort of scoff it off. I'm like, nah, you know what you're talking about. I'll be better. I won't do it. And then you actually get to the point they told you you're gonna get to. That's humbling because you're like, I should have listened. They were right, and I sort of just ignored it, and I did it to myself. So for me, like that's really humbling. Is knowing like, yeah, they were right the whole time.
And then from there, do you go and say, oh, you were right? Or do you have to get really, really humble? It's like, oh, you told me so.
They know. I know they're right at that point because it's like, yeah. I don't really go up to them and be like, oh, yeah, you were right. They'll know. They know that.
I do it sometimes, but that's really hard.
If it comes up, I'll mention it, but I don't go to them like just out of the blue and be like, yeah, you're right.
And usually it's received well.
Yeah. Usually they're like, yeah, I'm right.
You don't get like dunked on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. At least I hope you wouldn't get dunked on.
But the only reason why they know those things and can see the patterns is because they're with you all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
They know you. They know like how you behave and what you could go into.
There's a different kind of conversation you can have with your parents than your friends.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%.
Because even if you live with your friends like in college, they don't live
know
with you when you were growing up.
Yeah. They don't truly know you like
and they weren't old enough to recognize all the things that were happening when you were younger.
Yeah.
So there's a different kind of conversation, and all like the barriers already broken down whenever you're talking with your parents. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a really good point, and I think it's really about the choice to listen to the instruction, to love the rebuke, to realize that in the past you're usually wrong.
Yeah.
But sometimes your parents are wrong, and you'll make a good point.
Yeah, no, there are times where like they'll, like at Trinity, I've said this on a past one, like they've 100% thought that I wasn't gonna do that well at Trinity to start with, not because I was dumb, but because like it's very different than public school, and they're like, you have to put all your effort in, go 100%, and I put effort in, but I didn't go 100%. I didn't put as much as they told me to, because it was like almost obsessive, the amount they wanted me to be into it. I'm like, I want a life. I don't want to fully devote to school, even though it's probably the wise thing to do. And I didn't, and I ended up doing just fine. And at that point, even my dad was like, I was wrong. You didn't have to put all the time I told you to.
That feels good.
That's part of the pride as well. Like, you're prideful in that. Like, oh, I'm right, you're wrong. For that, I have to sort of be like, yeah, you were wrong this time, but you're right on other occasions. Because I try not to be too prideful when I am actually right. Because
if you stay there, then when your dad tells you to do something later, then you don't want to.
Because you're like, nah, I've been right before. Like, you're wrong again. But if you were humble the first time, like, yeah, but there are occasions where you're right, and then they tell you something else, you're more keen to listen that time, even though you've been right before.
I would say over this sort of 5-week, 6 weeks break, I was able to better understand the finished work of Christ and what actually the gospel was, and not so much living for God's favor and for God's love or for God's forgiveness, but yeah, I was living for all those things. But what I realized, I switched my spiritual diet in terms of sermons that I watched. I went from, I guess, more mainstream and, well, not necessarily, I would just say just more of the more charismatic pastors, like trendy charismatic pastors, like, I'm not going to drop any names, but you guys probably know.
Oh yeah, one just popped in my head.
Okay, and I liked it, but then I switched with some pushback from my mom and another one of my friends.
Taking input from parents.
Yup, exactly. And I disagreed with my mom for a while about that. But then, I don't know, I just watched the sermon and I was like, man, there was something different there. And what I realized is that good doctrine isn't just for snobs, and reading the Bible in context isn't just for snobs, because I always thought, oh, stop talking. You're so annoying. You're so depressing and all these kinds of things. But then I started watching it. I was like, man, this is better. Because if you're not preaching the gospel, people can't really understand the joy. If you're preaching any sort of works-based faith, then there's no joy in that. That's not good news. And so that's what I noticed with a lot of those preachers, which I think a lot of people don't notice. And there's a lot of just like wrong things being said that I believe very firmly that I think I've said on the podcast before. Like wrong things said on the podcast. Yeah. I can't think of a ton of things on the spot. But I think, yeah, and then I switched and I started understanding the finished work of Christ better. And that means that everything was Jesus said, it is finished whenever he died. That means that the debt is paid in full. The wages of sin is death. So wages are just the price or what it costs. Yeah. And so because God is so holy, whenever we sin against him and he's just, he gives us the punishment, or I guess the thing that we deserve for sin. So that's death. You die.
Yeah.
You die. And no man is righteous, no, not one. So I think I don't remember this all the time, but everybody's done really bad things. And really bad is just sinning. Because sinning is really bad.
Yeah.
And sometimes I forget that everybody's a sinner, including me.
Everyone sins.
And so everybody's a bad person. Shoot, now we're all on the same side.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's bad. And there's this one man, Jesus, that's good. And then he took our punishment. The judge switched places with the prosecuted. And now we get freedom and his perfect record and all the perfect life that he lived by imputed righteousness, which is a little bit difficult to understand. And then he tasted the death that we needed to taste, that we were meant to taste. And so we get forgiveness. And it was done. It was done. It was done. That's it. We have Jesus' righteousness, not because it's our righteousness, but because it's Jesus' righteousness. And now we are now righteous. We're holy and becoming more holy, and we'll be finished being holy whenever we're glorified. That's a process of sanctification. But the justification is done, meaning that we were given the gift. We got the opposite of what we deserve. So we deserve death, and we were given a gift, a good thing in return. So
which is grace.
Yeah, that's grace.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about.
Yeah.
And so that's done. You don't have to, you receive it by faith and faith alone. And I'm still understanding that, and that gets me so hyped. Because now, it's great. Grace. I love it.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell everybody every single sin you've done to be saved. You don't have to do this crazy confession of trying to remember everything. You can never repent enough. You just have to believe that there is nothing in here and take your trust away from yourself, but put your trust in what Jesus already did. And I might have said some wrong things just now, but I'm pretty sure.
Well, you're learning.
I'm still learning.
Just learning about it.
But I'm pretty sure that's closer, way closer than what I was at before.
Earlier. Yeah.
And so I'm so thankful to God for that. Mm-hmm. That's so humbling that I didn't get that before.
That's awesome, man.
Shin, what would you say your break's been like?
Well, most of the break, I have been, figuring out what our goals are for this pod and finding ways to improve the quality of it and the message behind it. But in terms of growing in my faith, I've definitely made a sort of a commitment to do more this summer for Christ because I feel like good works is a part of it.
Yeah.
So I signed up. Originally, I was only going to be a counselor for 1 week this summer at the camp I'm doing. But then when I went to the training, which was a weekend training, and you learn what this could mean for other kids, sort of being their leader in it, which was so cool to hear this experience of it because I was a camper as well, so I know what they're talking about. Counselor could make or break your week and what you get out of it. So once I heard that, I'm like, I got to do this more. So I'm now doing 2 weeks this summer. And then I'm also doing Luther Hill, which is sort of the training, the Lyle training, where you're also training to be a counselor and training to, help kids sort of grow in their faith. And to me, this is dope. Is helping others. That's so cool to me. It's something I've always wanted to do, just help others grow in that matter. And this podcast is also a way of doing that. And then I'm also doing a mission trip with my youth. I signed up for that. I didn't want to do it at first, but then once I went to the weekend retreat, I'm like, I got to do more. I got to do good works. So I'm doing that. So I think works, how important good works are, is the thing.
You don't have to do works. You're not forced to do works. You want to do works. And so now there's lots of opportunities that God's opening for you to do good works. And you would say that this summer you're trying to do those things.
Yeah. Most of my summer is booked for those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool. That's so exciting. That is good. That is a really good thing. That's a good use of a summer.
Oh, yeah. It'll be worth it.
That's so... You know how you just said dope?
Yeah.
My dad talked to me later after we finished the podcast, and he said, don't use that word. You don't understand. Do you understand the connotation of that word?
Yeah, kind of, but I just think it's cool.
That's
cool.
Because I talked with my cousins and everybody, and we all decided that now the connotation of that word is different, is not the same as people living in like the 80s and the 70s.
Yeah, but you still see. Okay, then okay.
I can't tell.
Yeah,
like it's.
I don't know. I use that word a lot, and no one's ever mentioned it, but I could be wrong. I could just not be up to standard on that. Up to that. Okay, then I'll change it. That's
very cool.
Very cool. It's a very cool experience. Awesome.
No, I just thought that was really funny.
No, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Shane, for a wonderful podcast.
Yep.
Wonderful podcast.
Wonderful. We're back.
We're back, baby. I like that. That was really good, Shane.
I did too. I enjoyed it.
We're going to start a tradition of shaking hands at the end of every podcast.